Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Munib Ahmed with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. President Hassan Rouhani has slammed the US for anti-Iran sanctions, calling them oppression against Tehran. Speaking at the cabinet meeting, Rouhani urged Washington not to postpone steps to resume implementation of international laws. Rouhani's remarks came after the US imposed new sanctions on Iran, targeting two officials of the Revolutionary Guard Corps. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan says Chief of General Staff Onik Gasparyan has been relieved of his duties. The government says the dismissal announced 2 weeks ago is now effective as the president has not signed the decree within the given time frame. Earlier, Pashinyan fired the general over accusations of a military coup attempt. The UN Security Council has failed to agree on a statement to condemn the coup in Myanmar. However, the Council has called for restraint by the military and threatened to consider further measures. Meanwhile, the US says it's repulsed by Myanmar's army's continued use of lethal force against its people. In Myanmar, security forces have launched a raid on the compound of striking rail workers. Pakistan has announced closure of schools and other restrictions to curb the increasing number of coronavirus cases. Pakistan is also starting vaccinations of people over 60 years of age against coronavirus from today. The country has registered over 1,700 new cases and 43 deaths overnight, while the tally climbs to 13,300. While globally, the virus has claimed more than 2.6 million lives and infected over 117 million people so far. These were the top stories. News in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's start the news. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani has slammed the United States for what he called the continuation of anti-Iran sanctions. Speaking at a cabinet session, Rouhani termed Washington's new curbs as oppression against Tehran. Rouhani urged White House not to postpone steps to resume implementation of international laws. He said Iran will immediately return to its commitments as soon as US lifts curbs. Rouhani's remarks came after the US imposed new sanctions on Iran, targeting two interrogators of Revolutionary Guard Corps. US State Department accused Iranian officers of violating human rights and abusing prisoners. The first sanction on Iran by President Joe Biden's administration banned the targeted officials from visiting the United States. Now for more on this, we have with us David M. Erzenhorn, an international political analyst. Sir, thank you very much for your time. Now, David, the United States has imposed new sanctions on Iran, targeting two officials of the Revolutionary Guard Corps. Would these sanctions not further escalate tensions between the two countries?
Well, there's no question that it is escalating tensions, as you just described, the reaction from President Rouhani. Of course, we have to understand these sanctions and what's happening in the context of the dance that's going on between Washington and Tehran over restarting negotiations about the Iran nuclear deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA. In fact, we saw over the weekend President Rouhani change his tune somewhat. He had a visit from the Irish Foreign Minister, Simon Coveney. Ireland has been appointed as a facilitator in the JCPOA process. And he said that Iran was ready to resume its commitments under the nuclear deal if, in fact, the U.S. lifted all sanctions. But this, of course, was a change from Iran having recently rejected an idea of coming back to the negotiating table so far. So we have this back and forth, one side escalating, the other side trying to then de-escalate. At some point, we know they're going to have to hold hands and jump together, get back into the water on the discussions going forward, or we'll just have this stalemate for the foreseeable future.
Right. Also, David, after the recent U.S. attacks on Iranian targets in Syria, Iran's continuing violations of the JCPOA, and then these latest sanctions, are there chances of any revival of the deal?
Well, you know, of course, everybody is hoping, especially here in Brussels, where I'm based for Politico at the EU, that these talks can resume, despite all the extra noise that's going on around this. Now, we know that there's a lot of baggage here. You heard Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, recently talking about Robert Levinson, an American CIA operative, believed, who disappeared in Iran 14 years ago, demanding that Tehran come up with an explanation for his whereabouts and what happened to him. Lots of noise on both sides, but the ultimate goal being to get them back to the negotiating table with the EU as a facilitator to try to get everybody back in compliance with the nuclear deal.
Right. Thank you very much, David, for joining us from Belgium. You are an international political analyst. Thank you very much for talking to Indus News. Now, moving on with the news, the United Nations Security Council has failed to agree on a statement to condemn the coup in Myanmar. However, the Council has called for restraint by the military and threatened to consider further measures.
Diplomats said talks on the statement would likely continue after China, Russia, India, and Vietnam suggested amendments to a British draft. Meanwhile, the United States says it is repulsed by Myanmar's army's continued use of lethal force against its people. State Department spokesperson Ned Price urged the military to exercise maximum restraint. In Myanmar, security forces have launched a raid on the compound of striking rail workers. The workers are observing a strike as part of the civil disobedience movement against the military rule. Some Myanmar police have fled to India after refusing orders to shoot at the protesters. According to New Delhi, around 100 people from Myanmar, mostly policemen, have crossed over into India so far since the protests began.
Now, Russia has invited Pakistan to a meeting on the Afghan peace being held in Moscow on 18th of this month. Last month, Russia's presidential envoy for Afghanistan, Zamir Kabulov, visited Pakistan and discussed Moscow's plan to hold this meeting. Russia state media quoted Kabulov as saying that the US, China and the Afghan parties have been also invited. Earlier, Islamabad announced its backing for Moscow's efforts for peace and reconciliation in Afghanistan. The planned meeting coincides with the renewed American push to accelerate the peace process. Earlier this week, US envoy Zalmay Khalilzad met Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa. Both sides stressed the need to accelerate progress towards peace in Afghanistan. Now, for more on this, we have been joined by Victoria Fontaine, an international political analyst from France. Now, Victoria, Moscow has invited Pakistan, the United States, China, the Afghan government and the Taliban for a meeting on the Afghan peace process. How important is this meeting when the US-backed talks are already underway in Doha?
Well, thank you for your invitation. I think it's a really important step towards a regional approach to peace in Afghanistan, as opposed to a bilateral approach between the United States and the Taliban. And this is very much akin to the regional response to the terrorist threat in the Sahel region of Africa. So I think that a similar model is being thought of for the region surrounding Afghanistan, and hopefully the peace talks are going to take a new pace as a result of this regionalization of the response to the situation and the crisis that Afghanistan is going through.
Right now, Victoria, the United States has proposed change of venue of the peace talks from Qatar to Turkey after the Taliban demanded to shift the venue. What could be the reason behind this?
Well, the reason is that the United States has made an internal promise during the recent political campaign to actually withdraw forces from Afghanistan. Now, it's very clear now to the Biden administration that there needs to be a military presence, an international military presence in Afghanistan. So in giving some leverage to other military forces, specifically Turkey, Germany, but also Azerbaijan, the United States is ensuring that it is fulfilling a campaign promise, but at the same time, it is keeping some NATO troops presence on the ground. And of course, Turkey is the perfect legitimate ally to, let's say, represent this NATO presence on the ground in Afghanistan.
Right, lastly, Victoria, Pakistan has been warning the world against peace spoilers in the Afghan peace process. Do you think India was not invited due to its objectionable role in the peace process?
Well, I would say that it was not invited because it promises a lot but delivers very little. In that sense, there is no role for India with regards to the peace process in Afghanistan at present. They are not delivering a significant aid towards reconstruction, and at the same time, they are not involved in the security, let's say, elements that could be spoiling the peace process as other regional countries would be. So in that sense, India is redundant to that particular part of the process.
Right, well said. Thank you, Victoria Fontan, for talking to Indus News. Now, moving on. Foreign Minister of Uzbekistan, Abdul Aziz Kamilov, has called on Prime Minister Imran Khan in Islamabad today. Both sides have discussed issues relating to enhancing bilateral cooperation. The meeting was attended by Foreign Secretary Sohail Mahmood and senior government officials of Pakistan and Uzbekistan. The two countries are closely cooperating to enhance regional connectivity. During the visit, Pakistan, Afghanistan and Uzbekistan signed a roadmap on the construction of Trans-Afghan Railway project. The Uzbek Foreign Minister arrived in Islamabad on a two-day official visit on Tuesday. Now in India, farmers say they are ready to continue their protests against 3 agricultural laws till Prime Minister Modi's government lasts. Speaking to the media, farmer leader Narendra Tikait said the centre cannot trust the stir by any means. He said farmers will vacate the protest sites only after their demands are met completely. Tikait added the protests will not end on the basis of future assurance or partial agreement on demands. Thousands of farmers have camped at New Delhi's border demanding the centre to repeal the contentious laws. Over 250 farmers have died during the agitation since November last year. Now, Nigerian special forces have killed 33 Boko Haram fighters in clashes in the country's northeastern Borno state. Nigerian media said 2 members of the armed forces have also been killed while 7 others are wounded. They said the army confiscated a significant amount of ammunition. It added forces also cleared an abandoned village where terrorists assembled to plan attacks. Over the past months, insurgents have targeted Nigerian soldiers in multiple ambushes. Boko Haram and its offshoot terrorist organization have killed thousands and displaced millions in northeastern Nigeria. Meanwhile, Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan says Chief of General Staff ONIC Gasparyan has been relieved of his duties. Pashinyan fired the general over accusations of coup attempt, but the sacking needed president's approval. In a statement, the government said the president did not sign the decree within the given time frame. The government said, therefore, the dismissal that was announced 2 weeks ago is now effective. Meanwhile, President Armen Sarkisian has appealed to the Constitutional Court to review the legality of Gasparyan's sacking. This came after Army Chief demanded Pashinyan to step down for inappropriately handling Nagorno-Karabakh conflict with Azerbaijan. Now, Saudi Arabia says Houthis' attacks on oil installations in the kingdom are attacks on the global economy. In a meeting chaired by King Salman bin Abdul Aziz Al Saud, the Saudi cabinet reviewed defensive measures to protect the oil facilities. The cabinet said attacks targeting Ras Tanura port and a residential area in Dhahran are blatant violations of international law. It renewed call for the international community to stand against these actions directed against civilian objects and vital installations. The Houthis have ramped up attacks against Saudi installations, including the international airport, military and oil facilities. Now, Turkey says it has neutralized 25 militants of the Kurdistan Workers' Party in northern Iraq. In an interview, Turkish Defense Minister Hulusi Akar said the militants were targeted in an air operation in the Hakurk and Kandil regions. Hulusi Akar said Ankara continues its struggle against all threats by PKK and ISIS. He said Turkey is determined to save its people from the scourge of terrorism. Ankara holds the fighter group responsible for the deaths of some 40,000 people in a 30-year terror campaign. Now, Brazil has reported nearly record 1,972 deaths from COVID-19 in a day as its fatalities crossed 268,000. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 2.6 million lives and infected over 117 million people so far. More on the coronavirus in this report.
The issues related to the coronavirus vaccine, such as inequitable distribution and politicization, are increasing by the day. People's Vaccine Alliance said rich nations are inoculating one person every second, while a majority of the poorest nations is yet to give even a single dose. Mexico is turning to China to fill a vaccine shortage a week after the United States ruled out sharing vaccines with the country in the short term. Meanwhile, the United States House of Representatives has cleared President Joe Biden's $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief bill for a final vote. The House voted 219 to 210 along party lines to advance the bill for a final vote. Commenting on changes to his relief program, Biden said the aid has reached smaller businesses, plus women-owned and minority-owned firms.
With this new program, and we're going to continue this, by the way, it's not only, you've been the only businesses with fewer than 20 folks to apply in the last couple of weeks. But now we're going to keep the focus on it because a lot of minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses are increased significantly by 20 and 15%.
In Europe, drug maker Johnson & Johnson's has told the European Union that it is facing supply issues that may complicate the delivery of 55 million vaccine doses to the bloc. Meanwhile, British lawmakers say the United Kingdom's COVID-19 test and trace system has not yet proven its worth. The Parliament's Public Accounts Committee decreed the unimaginable cost of the program, saying there is little evidence of its overall effectiveness. Over in France, the number of COVID-19 patients in ICUs is at the highest level since the end of November.
What is worrying is that the pressure and the limit being reached is mainly on the intensive care unit beds. There's still a bit of leeway, but ICU beds in our region and a few other regions, we are starting to reach the limits of saturation. This disease is still killing around 10,000 people every month in France. So this is a serious disease.
The daily infections in Turkey rose to 2-month highs more than a week after President announced an easing of measures. Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh said hospitals are overfull with ICUs operating at 100% capacity with coronavirus patients.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, the National Command and Operations Centre has reimposed COVID-19 restrictions following a surge in infections. Federal Education Minister Shafkat Mahmood says education institutions in 9 cities will be closed for 2 weeks from March 15th. Addressing a press conference, Special Assistant on Health Faisal Sultan said the outdoor wedding and dining policy will continue. Earlier, Planning Minister Asad Umar presided over the NCOC meeting. Meanwhile, the country has begun inoculation of people over 60 years of age. COVID-19 claimed 43 more lives overnight in Pakistan, increasing the death toll to 13,300. The Health Ministry reported 1,786 new cases in the past 24 hours. Now, the UN Human Rights Office says Swiss BURKA ban is problematic from a human rights perspective and deeply regrettable. UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Ravina Shamdasani said this in a press briefing. Shamdasani said arguments in favour of such bans in the European countries question the free agency of women who wear face coverings. She said vague justifications on the decision cannot be considered a legitimate reason for such an invasive restriction of fundamental freedoms. She said banning the burqa will further lead to women's marginalization and exclusion from public life. On Sunday, Swiss lawmakers accepted a proposal to outlaw face coverings in public spaces. And Germany says it wants to explore the possibility of a joint sanctions policy with the United States amid improved relations. Foreign Minister Heiko Maas says the transatlantic partners should act together to defend their common interests and values. At an event, Maas said the joint sanctions will target countries over human rights and other abuses. Maas lamented what he believed was the lack of coordinated action under former U.S. President Donald Trump. His tenure was marked by intense pressure on Germany over its spending obligations in NATO and Nord Stream 2. However, Berlin has recently taken steps to meet Washington's concerns. Now, South Korea has agreed to a 13.9% increase in its contribution to hosting U.S. troops for 2021. The biggest annual rise in nearly 2 decades takes the country's contribution to over $1 billion. Seoul's chief negotiator Jeong Eun-bu said the agreements will reaffirm the importance of the alliance. Meanwhile, the foreign ministry said the boost to contribution is in line with its annual defense budget increase. In a statement, the ministry added both sides agreed to freeze Seoul's contribution for the year 2020. South Korea hosts around 28,500 U.S. soldiers as deterrents to North Korea. Now, the United States says it's reviewing former President Donald Trump's designation of Cuba as a state sponsor of terror. However, the White House said a broader Cuba policy shift is not currently among President Joe Biden's top priorities. White House spokesperson Jen Psaki said a careful review of Trump-era's policy decisions is underway. Talking to reporters, Psaki reiterated Washington's commitment to making human rights a core pillar of U.S. policy. She added a guiding principle for Cuba policy will be supportive for democracy and human rights. The Trump administration returned Havana to the U.S. list of state sponsors of terrorism 9 days prior to exit. Now, clashes between security forces and the participants of a march against police violence broke out in Greece's capital Athens. The police said a cop has received serious head injuries while two other officers, are also hurt. Youths organized the protests after a video on social media showed police beating a man with batons. The police said more than 5,000 people marched through the residential area of Nea Smyrna. The protesters threw fire bombs and stones at the police who tried to repel them with water cannons and tear gas. The police said they detained 10 people on suspicion of taking part in the riots. Meanwhile, Portugal's President Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa has been sworn in for his second term as head of the state. The inauguration came with a message of hope after a year of the pandemic. At his swearing-in ceremony, de Sousa pledged to defend, comply and enforce the constitution. Addressing the parliament, he said his mission will be to end fear and restore confidence in the people. De Sousa expressed his desire for the next 5 years to be more a reason for hope than disappointment.
May the next 5 years be more a reason for hope than disappointment. That's our dream and purpose. A year has passed under so much mourning, so much sacrifice, so much solitude. We must believe. We will believe.
Was re-elected in general elections with just over 60% of the vote. Now, moving on to UK, the Buckingham Palace says the race issues raised by the Duke and Duchess of Sussex are concerning and taken very seriously. In a statement, the palace said recollections may vary, but the matters will be addressed privately. It said the royal family is saddened to learn the full extent of how challenging the last few years have been for Harry and Meghan. It added that Prince Harry, his wife and their son will always be much-loved family members. Meanwhile, British television host Piers Morgan has left ITV's show following thousands of complaints in a row over Meghan. The anchor has been a constant critic of the couple, drawing backlash from viewers and an investigation by a media watchdog. Russia and China have signed a memorandum of understanding to set up an international lunar research station. Moscow and Beijing will draw up a roadmap to establish the International Scientific Lunar Station and cooperate closely on the project. Russia's space agency Roscosmos said under the deal they will develop a complex experimental research facility created on the surface or in the orbit of the moon. China's National Space Administration said the project was open to all interested countries and international partners. Earlier this week, China and France reaffirmed their commitment to working together in the field of space exploration. Now, art collectors and enthusiasts have had trouble acquiring pieces from the famous street artist Banksy. But due to the efforts of a Munich-based curator, they can now enjoy the artist's work in one place. Let's find out more in this report.
Little is known about the identity of Banksy, but even anonymously, he has earned worldwide acclaim for his witty, subversive street art. Spread throughout the country and sometimes removed by property owners or the state, Banksy's art is not always accessible. After extensive effort, Oliver Foster has now gathered what he calls the most extensive collection of the artist's work.
So we have around more than 100 artworks that involve installations, prints, sculpture, mapping. So the whole idea that we have it is just create a whole experience to you to understand the whole job of Banksy. So the most important thing is like you come over here and discover how Banksy developed all the speech around like the whole career that he had.
Comprised of available prints and lovingly reproduced installations, Foster wants to allow as many people as possible to see Banksy's development as an artist. For viewers, there is a mix of world-famous and the lesser-known, including Girl with Balloon. This was originally painted as a mural on London's Waterloo Bridge. An original painting of the work shredded itself with a mechanism hidden in its frame moments after selling for more than $1.4 million in an auction in 2018.
I really think like the whole message about Banksy is like we need to be more humans. This society right now is very weird for me. So we are in the cutting edge moment, like humanity. We can see all the changes and all the bad things that we made it. And I think Banksy is the best way to make a reflection about this and thinking about it.
The Munich exhibition runs until May 2nd under the usual coronavirus restrictions.
Now in business stories, European stocks are trading mixed after Wall Street rose on a rally for major tech companies. International markets are keeping an eye on the passage of the COVID-19 relief bill in the US this week. Basic resources dropped 2% to lead losses as most sectors slid into negative territory. The pan-European stock 600 slipped marginally below the flat line, but London's FTSE 100 rose fractionally. Frankfurt's DAX also added slightly. The CAC 40 in Paris advanced less than 0.1%. Early Asian markets also opened mixed, with most major ones in positive territory except Shanghai and Seoul. And now let's have a look at how the weather is doing around the world. that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.